Manners and Behaviors in Pride and Prejudice by Emily Seideau, Sarah Snyder, Ana Gonzalez Daré, Claire Hauk, Jordan Holmeyer, and Biz Migley. Originally titled First Impressions, Pride and Prejudice is a novel based off of manners, behaviors, and the results of the way in which people act. Every character in the novel is judged based upon the way they present themselves in a public manner. In fact, the plot itself exemplifies the consequences of false first impressions and misunderstandings. One of the central conflicts in this novel is between Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet. The reader is exposed to the contrast in the way women and men behave in society. Women, for example, are expected to be submissive to the dominance of any male. On the other hand, men are expected to keep their place in society by finding a suitable wife. It is truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. In Pride and Prejudice, the behaviors and mannerisms of 18th century English gentlemen play a significant role in the novel. An English gentleman is a man that varied in degrees by rank, birth, and worth of living in a parliamentary monarchy. Throughout the novel, readers are subjected to various forms of behaviors that determine a person's place in society. Other characteristics of a gentleman are civility and politeness, in which civility is the more dominant quality. During the time of the novel, civility meant conformity to the principles of a social order, while politeness referred to a polished and refined sense of character. Both civility and politeness made up the quote-unquote elegance of behavior that was a requirement of a gentleman of the time. Mr. Bingley surpasses the definition of what it means to be a gentleman at the time. He is not only extremely wealthy, but is also kind and polite. In social events, he shines as being the most outgoing and optimistic man in the room. Jane comments on his politeness and says, "He is just what a young man ought to be, sensible, good-humored, lively, and I never saw such happy manners. Because of his outgoing personality and fortunate disposition, he is an excellent gentleman and would make for a suitable husband for any woman." Another example of an English gentleman is Mr. Darcy. Mr. Darcy is born into a more elite class, a rich landowner or gentry, and is educated. All three of these characteristics are what define an English gentleman by a certain degree of gentlemanliness. Mr. Darcy not only fits the criteria of a gentleman, but also behaves like one as well around his friends and family. However, to women, Mr. Darcy is first perceived as a snobby, arrogant man. Elizabeth does not want to get herself involved with such a man because of the first impression he makes. Quote unquote, "Good manners must flow from good motives, and true gentlemen aren't always easy to identify." To Elizabeth, Darcy's motives and manners fell short of what she desired in a man. Fortunately, after she gets to know him better, this perception changes. Elizabeth discovers there is more than meets the eye to Mr. Darcy's arrogant exterior. Their behaviors towards one another change, resulting in a turn of events for the central conflict. This just shows how important one's behaviors are in retrospect to the way things turn out. It is easy to see that manners in this book are superficial. They are external ways of acting, but in fact do not show the person's true identity. While Caroline Bingley is shown to be flawless in the topic of manners, this does not show her true thoughts and actions that otherwise would be shown if she was not placed in this type of society that puts so much emphasis on manners. While men are the superior gender in Elizabethan society, women are portrayed as inferior in both manners and in rank. However, Elizabeth is an exception to this. She knows what she wants in a man and does not conform to the standards that society has set. She wants to marry for love, not for wealth. Although Elizabeth wanted to marry for love, marriage in the gentry class followed strict social standards. The way in which gentry viewed marriage was far different from Elizabeth's perspective. Quote unquote, "Marriage linked the inheritance of the groom to the dowry of the bride, and it was felt that the two partners needed to be of similar economic stature to ensure the continued prominence of both families." End quote. This rule was followed by gentry to maintain their social status. This rule is broken in Pride and Prejudice when rich landowner Mr. Darcy married a commoner, Elizabeth Bennet. Lady Catherine references this social standard when speaking to Elizabeth about Mr. Darcy's betrothal to another woman of equal status. She states, quote unquote, "Their fortune on both sides is splendid. They are destined for each other by the voice of every member of their respective houses." End quote. Lady Catherine makes it clear to Elizabeth that by marrying Mr. Darcy she is breaking the strict social rules on marriage. Some of the manners expected by women included in the Regency society seem ridiculous compared to the present. For example, women were not to shrug their shoulders. Shoulders were to be as low as possible at all times so as to stand out. Another would be that little girls should walk or sit with their feet turned outward because turning the feet inward looks awkward. At formal balls in the novel, women also have standards set out for them. They have to wait until they are asked by a man to dance. They cannot initiate in dancing or polite conversation with a man because it is the man's duty to carry out those initiations. In addition, when women are approached, they are perceived as foolish if they deny a man's request. Elizabeth is one of these quote unquote foolish women for denying Mr. Darcy's request to dance. Elizabeth, as the independent woman that she is, does not abide by these terms. When asked to dance by Mr. Darcy, she politely declines his proposal and walks away. This comes to a shock to Darcy because he realizes how different Elizabeth is from the rest of the women in that society. Unlike her strong and independent sister, Lydia Bennet is the epitome of a desperate teenager. Every action and decision she makes reflects her immaturity. She is described as being quote unquote untamed, unabashed, wild, noisy, and fearless, and will flirt with anyone in a uniform. Her elopement with Mr. Wickham shows her carelessness and need for attention. Her actions reveal that she is willing to embarrass her family just for a man. Ultimately, this 15-year-old's actions are a clear reflection of who she has been raised by. Mrs. Bennet is fixated on marrying off her daughters to wealthy men. She is extremely naive and is constantly being mocked by people in society and her husband. Mr. Bennet speaks to Mrs. Bennet extremely condescendingly. He views her ignorance as a source of amusement and finds her opinions irrelevant. Mrs. Bennet's actions in public settings are not those that are expected of classy women. She would say almost anything to try to advance her place in society. Through these simple manners that were expected out of people in the Regency society, one can see how behaviors and the true identity of a person can be disguised. These behaviors show the impact of society on the characters in the novel. Each character behavior does not always reflect their true identity. It shows the thought processes and resulting actions of a person. Through these thoughts and actions, the reader is able to learn a character's beliefs, opinions, attitudes, and values. It is up to the character to decide how they want their behavior to reflect them. Overall, manners show to be a reflection of what the character's world expects of them, while their behaviors is a decision all for themselves. While a character might show friendly manners because that is what is expected, the character may feel angry on the inside. It is important to realize this in Pride and Prejudice because manners suppress many characters' behaviors that would have otherwise been seen in a less strict society.